Hi, Dr. P here to consider a question about game design. Is it art? Is it engineering? Is it science? Is it something else? Well, I think it's all three of these, but it's considerable explanation involved. So we need some definitions taken from online. Art, the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. Unquote. It's not limited to painting, sculpture, or musical composition, although that's what people usually think of. Now, engineering, we're going to go into in a little more detail. First, quote, the branch of science and technology concerned with the design, building, and use of engines, machines, and structures, unquote. Or in this case, of games. Another, quote, the application of science and mathematics by which the properties of matter and the sources of energy in nature are made useful to people. The design and manufacture of complex products, unquote. Another one, quote, engineering is the creative application of science, mathematical methods, and empirical evidence to the innovation, design, construction, operation, and maintenance of structures, machines, materials, devices, systems, processes, and organizations, and I would add games. My simple version of this is designing and building things so that they work usefully and safely. Science and the scientific method. Quote, science is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the universe, unquote. Scientific method, which is much more specific to games. Quote, a method or procedure that has characterized natural science since the 17th century, consisting in systematic observation, measurement, and experiment, and the formulation, testing, and modification of hypotheses, unquote. Scientific method is fundamental to problem solving, even though game designers cannot always isolate factors the way scientists often do or try to do. So in applying all this to game design, we have the from the gut method of game design, which is the art approach, if it's anything other than guessing, and sometimes it's just guessing. But we can have hypotheses and tests in game design. And in fact, when you create a game in your mind and then make a prototype of it, you are in effect making a very large and complicated hypothesis. And then you're testing it to see if it works the way you want it to work. And of course, the first time it doesn't, but you can refine it, make it better, and sometimes just test parts of it. But on the tabletop, this is qualitative, not quantitative. That is, you're looking for the quality of the testing, not the numbers. It's not just numbers. You can be more quantitative in video games with alpha releases and the like. That is to say, you release a game before it's finished. Some people actually pay for it, and you use their play online as a test for how you can improve the game. There's no way to do widespread alpha testing releases in tabletop except maybe someday through Tabletopia and Tabletop Simulator. Now, metrics design, which we see mainly in video games, is an extreme. It's kind of science, but frequently it's more a worship of statistics. I think that trying to use just one method is disastrous. I think in particular of the people who say that game design is all about metrics. There was even a company that let all their game designers go because they said all they needed to do was follow the metrics. What you tend to get in this situation is a soulless result that's not very good. Then again, there are those who design entirely by the gut. Well, that can easily become too much like throwing things against a wall to see what sticks. Too much guess and check, which we used to call trial and error. Too much wasted time. You've got to test what you've made, and that becomes engineering and scientific method. So overall, there's art to game design, but there's also a lot of engineering and of applying scientific method. It doesn't have to be just one of the three. What are the proportions? Well, I'd say that creativity is about 10% of game design. And creativity roughly corresponds to art. Engineering uses scientific method for unfamiliar problems and uses results of what have gone before for familiar problems. And games are partly familiar problems and partly unfamiliar problems. So I'm not sure I can really separate the two and give a percentage. Certainly an experienced practitioner can get more right to start with in a game than an inexperienced practitioner. Now we come to the general question of theory versus practice. I am a retired college teacher, and my observations is that there's a fundamental flaw in formal education today in the United States, where the theory is the focus and the practical is not considered. That's partly because even college has become a stepping stone to graduate school, and so there's a focus on theory rather than practice. But there are other reasons. One is a fear in academia of actual practitioners, because so many academics are not practitioners. For example, many who teach game design aren't accomplished as game designers at all. Many who teach creative writing have no record of real success, but they have a degree in creative writing. In general, there's no substitute for designing games if you want to learn to design games, and that's practice, not theory. In discussing this, someone told me that they'd talked to a designer who suggested game design is like cooking. Well, there may be a little to this for people who are trying to cook new recipes, but there's not a lot that's new in the culinary arts. There are certainly many culinary schools, and people can learn a lot there that's useful to cooking, and they do a lot of cooking practicing what they're trying to become experts at. But fundamentally, following a recipe is very straightforward, much more than game design is straightforward. Recipes represent doing things by rote, just following a set of rules. Game design, or at least good game design, is not like that. And when I say good, folks, I'm not using the definition in games that seems to be becoming common, which is good is average. No, I mean a lot better than average. Getting to the 80% stage in the game design is at least related to following a recipe, but it's not what makes good games. The 80% stage is where the game works, but that doesn't make it a good game. Game design is much more problem solving than cooking, I think. One aspiring designer said to me, the thing they told me in CS, which is computer science, here are the basics, now go study under someone and become better. It's really about their apprenticeship more than anything. Now, the profs said that partly because they didn't know much about making good games if it was a typical computer science department. But one has to say an apprenticeship is certainly very useful if you can arrange it. It's more likely achieved by video game designers, where there are often several designers for a biggish game, but you've got to be able to get hired there, and that's difficult when you're a beginner. Tabletop game designers tend to do things on their own, so apprenticeships are difficult. The best you can do is talk to a lot of other people who are game designers. Now, we also have the problem online of savage critics. Online game design discussions frequently become arguments, and they're subject to the vagaries of online discussion just as anything else, especially when you get the Dunning-Kruger effect. That is, people who understand the topic so poorly that they think they're experts when they are actually clueless. And that includes many people who play a lot of games but don't understand that game design is quite different from playing games, very different. As an example of the savagery, one person told me he'd argued for a certain design method on Board Game Geek and was, quote, destroyed, unquote. And that led him to leave Board Game Geek. I told him, Board Game Geek is often very toxic. Groupthink taken to an extreme, wanting everyone to think the same and be the same. I don't bother with it, in general. We also have the problem of the great internet fuckwad theory, which seems to apply a great deal of time, which is online plus anonymity plus audience results in a fuckwad. People who say things that they would never say face to face, or never say with people who knew them, but they will online. But another part of the problem is that so many people nowadays need validation by others of their preferences and opinions. They're often offended when someone disagrees with them because it diminishes their personal validation. So they try to convince the offender to change, often vehemently or even viciously. They are not worth bothering with, and they're very persistent. Art, engineering, science, I think game design is all three. Thanks for listening.